Do you feel drawn to learn more about witchcraft and the occult, but feel lost on where to start? Then welcome to Get In Loser, We're Doing Witchcraft, a podcast all about what it means to be a witch and where to get started on your journey.
Join us as we navigate through various witchy topics and share what we have learned about the craft. So get in, witches, and let's talk about grounding. Yeah, I was totally researching this. My little health and wellness heart was so happy. I was reading medical journals. I was like, oh, I haven't done this in so long.
Right, same. I felt the same way whenever I started looking at, because I plugged in for whatever reason, I don't know why, but my credentials still work on my university for my graduate,
I'm jealous.
Library stuff. So I'm able to still look at peer-reviewed articles. And so I just put in grounding and earthing and mental health. And I'm just like, oh my God, there's so much stuff. There's so much science behind it. And that's what I love, is because there's so many topics that are witchy that have strong backing in science. So grounding, or sometimes known as earthing, is something that it's not just used in witchcraft and pagan practices. Grounding can be seen in many mental health practices. And while there are many definitions of grounding on the internet, the simplest way to describe grounding for those who may not be familiar with the term is that grounding is a way to electrically connect yourself to the earth. It can be described as the ability to perceive and to live in the here and now by paying attention to your body through your senses and through breathing and through an active connection and relationship with the earth.
Grounding refers to direct skin contact with the surface of the earth, though later when I talk about medicinal and therapeutic backgrounds of grounding, there are devices that you can use as well. So this can be done by just placing your bare feet onto the ground, or the palms of your hand just directly onto the ground. You could even lay on the ground so that you have a full body contact. Obviously, you can't be naked out in public, but at least if you're wearing shorts.
As who?
Yeah. Yeah. If you're wearing shorts and a tank top and you lay down into the ground, you're getting more skin surface contact with the earth.
And in witchcraft, grounding is a way to connect yourself with the energies of the earth or of the ground.
So when we look at grounding from a therapeutic or a medical background, grounding or earthing is a therapeutic technique that it can involve doing activities that ground or electrically connect you to the earth.
This is based on the energetic alignment with the earth between the feet, the pelvis, and the head. So a quote that I found online, it was by this guy. His name is Alexander Lowen. And honestly, I don't remember exactly what his certifications were, but I know he did a lot of research on grounding and he has a lot of information on the internet about it. But basically, he said that all humans are physically, emotionally, and energetically grounded to the earth. We move by the discharge of energy into the ground, and all energy finds its way into the earth. He also pioneered current bioenergetics, which is defined as a specific form of body psychotherapy based on the continuity between body and mind. And it's based on this whole assumption of the body is the person. You see this in social work, and it's crucial in trauma work and working with borderline issues and eating disorders. And there are 6 important levels that he discusses with grounding. So essentially, the 6 levels that he talks about are verticality, or the contact with the ground, the contact with one's own physicality, the capacity for emotional holding, the discharge of energy into the ground, being able to understand ourselves, and then at the same time, being able to connect and relate to others, which would include a therapist.
It's also used medically, and I found this a lot in earthing science and grounding physics. So these explain that electrical charges from the earth can have a positive effect on the human body overall. So researchers have studied the effects of grounding on inflammation, cardiovascular disease, and it showed that there were less red blood cell clotting, muscle damage, immune response, wound healing, overall mood, prevention and treatment of chronic inflammation, and even autoimmune diseases.
And it also helps regulate psychological and the physical state. With chronic pain, it's shown to be lessened after grounding exercises, and stress level and fatigue were decreased after grounding exercises.
My little health and wellness heart was so happy doing this research and having like medical and like scientific background research for this particular topic. So I spent hours and hours and hours like pouring through the NIH like free, what do you call them? Like research papers and peer reviewed journals and stuff. I had so much fun with this one. But through these studies, I found one particular study showed that grounding an organism produces measurable differences in the concentrations of white blood cells, cytokines, and other molecules involved in inflammatory response. The same study also notes that subjective reports that walking barefoot on the earth enhances health and provides feelings of well-being can be found in the literature and practices of diverse cultures from all around the world. So it's not something that's like brand new. It's not something that, you know, a random scientist in America made up, or a doctor or a therapist or whatever, just to kind of like be like, oh, look at this cool new thing I'm doing. Like, this is something that's been documented across cultures and for years. Some really cool examples that I found. So there was a study done on wound healing using grounding. And for this one, they didn't do like just bare feet on the ground. They used, you can actually buy these on Amazon. It's a rod that you plug into the ground that has a wire and then a patch. And so you put that patch on your skin and it delivers the energy straight from the earth through the wire, like through the rod in the ground, through the wire to your skin. So they did that for these studies because it was easier to control versus just having someone report back that they did grounding. So this 84-year-old woman, she was a diabetic and she had an open wound on her foot for like 8 months. It just would not heal. It wouldn't close. It was just there. And being diabetic, she didn't have like great circulation down to her feet. Her skin was pretty grayed all around this wound. They did grounding treatments with the rod and patch over 2 weeks. And within that time frame, I think they did 30 minutes a day for the grounding sessions. But within the 2-week time frame, they checked back with the wound at 1 week and it had already scabbed over and the coloring had like come back away from gray. It was getting more to like a natural skin tone. By the end of week 2, the scab was almost completely healed and her like skin color was back to normal, like a pinkish color.
That's
just
amazing.
in 2 weeks of 30-minute sessions every day. And then another one that I found was there was a cyclist in the Tour de France. Basically, while he was riding, the bike chain somehow like got tangled in his leg and ripped his leg open like on his calf. He had this like huge gash, right?
Gross.
And he got stitches, went to the doctor. The doctors in France were like, hey, there's this thing called grounding. How do you feel about doing that? He's like, yeah, sure. So they put a patch, the same way that the rod to the earth with the patches, they put a patch above and below the wound. By within 24 hours, all of the swelling and redness was gone. So he just had like the scab and stitches. And then by day 2, 48 hours later, it was like they were able to cut the stitches out and he could go back into like cycling. Yeah. So just 48 hours and grounding like just sped the healing process up completely. And then he was able to continue. And then that 84-year-old woman, that wound was open for 8 months. And they closed it and almost had it fully healed and her skin color back to normal, you know, that had been like gray forever, basically in a 2-week period, just with 30-minute sessions.
That's amazing.
Right? I love it. So the summary of this research showed that grounding appears to improve sleep, normalize day and night cortisol rhythms, reduce pain, reduce stress, shift the autonomic nervous system from sympathetic toward parasympathetic activation, increase heart rate variability, speed wound healing, and reduce blood viscosity. There was also a separate study that I came across that showed how grounding affects muscle recovery after working out. So researchers basically created delayed onset muscle soreness, which most people, if you work out, you've probably heard of DOMS, or you've probably felt them. Like if you've never worked out before and then you go really hard in the gym and then you can't even like use your arms for the next like 3 days because they're so sore. That's DOMS. So basically these researchers created this DOMS through concentric contractions, basically basically making these people come in and do like 200 squats, and they had to like pause and do all these things that was going to make it even worse for muscle recovery. And then they treated half of the subjects with grounding, and the other half, they did what they called sham grounding, which was basically just placebo grounding. They made them think that they were grounding and they weren't. By the end of the study, it showed that those within the grounding group had a faster recovery timeframe based on blood draws and then other testing that they did, suggesting that grounding may influence the healing abilities within the muscles. Yeah. So now I did that after reading this, like I read it the night before I got up, I did my workout, and I went and sat in the grass with my feet, like just straight on the ground for like 30 minutes. Cause I was like, I don't want to be sore.
Mm-hmm.
And then the therapists use several grounding techniques to help patients with anxiety, PTSD, depression, or when there are symptoms of a loss of reality, which Sam talked about a little bit earlier.
Yeah. And so some of the studies that I read was talking about how grounding can work in dance and like dance therapy, which I thought was really interesting. So basic movement exercises can help in grounding practices anyway. It can create well-being, stability, integration, and a connection to reality at the physical, sensory, emotional, and social levels. You can do this to yourself by massaging your feet, performing ballet pliés, making contact with another person through the palms of your hand or the soles of your feet, jumping, skipping, etc. But this can also be done with rhythm and percussion. And drums and percussion are reminders of a heartbeat, and they have a calming or excitatory effect depending on how the drums and percussion are used. So you see this in different styles of dancing, like traditional dances from West Africa, for instance, were really talked about in this research study that I read. Basically, in West Africa, oftentimes these traditional dances, what you see are both feet are pressed parallel to the ground so that there is a connection with the earth. And there's a lot of use of the pelvis and the legs, moving the hips, swaying back and forth, etc. But the upper body is free to move while the lower body is rooted to the ground. The upper body is said to carry the melody while the lower body carries the rhythm. Therapists and researchers have been using rhythm in preventative and reparative capacities in mental health, and they've used this based on what they've seen in some of these other cultures, like what they've seen in African cultures. And they've shown that it has helped in depression and anxiety symptoms, and has also been used to build up empathy, and it activates emotions and has been used to help communicate with patients who have dementia.
So we actually, for my job, we do a program called Plant Pals. Well, we don't do it. We participated in the training because they wanted us to see what it was. But we basically paid for this program to be brought into our county. We use it in our senior centers. So it includes, they do music and dance therapy with the seniors. So they open up with music, and then they do this thing where they go around the room and one person has to do a little move. And it's kind of like a memory game where the next person has to do that move and then their own move. And it just keeps going through all of them. And then the bulk of the session is them actually like working with plants and using soil and planting and, doing all these cool things. And at the end, they make a mandala out of like leaves and sticks and flowers or whatever. So it's like grounding them to the earth with the soil, using the music and the movement to help. It's meant to combat social isolation, like getting them all there together. They get paired with children that work with them. And then on top of it, they're using all these like researched therapies that show to help with dementia, with anxiety, with depression. So it's really cool to see that and then understand it from my perspective of having like gone through the training for this program.
That is amazing.
Yeah, I love it. Some types of grounding would be walking barefoot. It's one of the easiest ways to ground yourself to the earth, or just like sitting in the grass and planting your feet and hands into it, or dirt, sand, whatever.
During this time, it's good to be mindful of taking in the colors of the grass, the textures of the ground, the temperature and the feeling of the ground. Is the grass wet? Is it soft, dry? Does it kind of hurt your feet? Whatever the sensations that you're feeling, just like being present in that moment. And it's excellent because it brings you into that here and now as you're focusing on something real, something that is actually happening beneath your feet.
And then, as I mentioned earlier, you can lay on the ground to increase your skin to ground contact and allowing you to absorb more of the earth's energy. You can submerge yourself in water, just spending time in natural waters like a lake, a river, a stream, or the ocean if you're near those. Just, walk out into the water and spend time out there, like Sam said, being present, feeling the sensations, the temperatures, bringing yourself to the here and now. And then I mentioned earlier that you could also use equipment. So while just spending time with your skin in contact with your surface is easy and it's free, some people don't necessarily have that option. Maybe they live somewhere where it's cold 80% of the year, like there's snow everywhere and they don't want to be out in the snow, or for whatever reason, like if you cannot get outside to use the actual earth, you can buy grounding mats, grounding sheets or blankets, grounding socks, grounding bands and patches, or like I was talking about earlier, the rods with the patches that you just kind of plug into earth. And for those, they say you can even just use like a pot of soil, like go out and have like a pot of dirt from the earth and then just plug your little rod into it. So that's pretty cool. And all of these types of equipment can be found online, most of them on Amazon. So grounding is just the ability to connect our energy with the energy of the earth, which is a neutral energy. Grounding realigns your electrical energy by reconnecting you to the earth. When it comes to witchcraft, grounding is the practice of balancing personal energies.
And it's a way to connect yourself with the energies of the earth. It is usually done before or after working with magic, but really it can be done at any time. It can be used to stabilize your own energy or feelings or draw upon the energy of the earth. And it can also be used as a mindfulness practice that keeps you connected to the here and now. And it can help induce a grounded state of being.
So when your energy is unbalanced, some symptoms that you might feel could be dizziness or lightheadedness, getting headaches, maybe feeling just generally unwell or exhausted, having sensitivity to light and sound, feeling overstimulated or anxious, or just being uncomfortable, maybe feeling a buzzing under your skin that makes you feel uncomfortable. Those are just a few of the symptoms that you could feel. There's a ton. I mean, it depends on the person, but centering, grounding, and shielding are often practiced together. So centering is essentially the foundation of energy work, and its techniques are very similar to meditation. Grounding is a way of eliminating those excess energies that you may have stored during ritual or spell work. Or if you're an empath, that's another thing that I came across a lot. Like empathic people often have to ground themselves to just kind of rid that excess energy that they absorb from everyone around them. And then shielding is a way to protect yourself from either like a psychic, a mental, or a magical attack. Grounding is essentially one of the most important skills to learn when you start spell work and rituals. It can ease a lot of issues for beginners when doing energy-based work. And it's also been called the most important magical care tool in a witch's arsenal.
So let's talk about how grounding is used in magic. It's used to raise vibrations, making the prevalent energy useful for our own magical goals and setting intentions. It can be used in drawing energy. The earth can give us energy, and imagining the earth as the living, fertile being that it is and the source of life that gave us all life is a great way for us to view grounding in terms of drawing energy. It's inherent energy in the earth that we can draw upon for healing and strength. Grounding can also be used to neutralize energy and we can use it to give energy back to the earth. We can use it if we are having restless thoughts, if we're upset, if we have negative energy, if we're anxious or tense, or if there's signs of energy buildup that Tiffany had mentioned before. You can use it to transport this energy back into the earth.
It just helps you to like combat that feeling of being drained when you're doing spell work or any magical work in general.
And with that, you can use it to manage overwhelming situations like thoughts, feelings, emotions, or any sort of magic that you're dealing with that's overwhelming. Like if you're working through something in shadow work or doing any sort of invocations or applications, any sort of astral projection or divination that has been tough for you, grounding can help keep us all present in the here and now and fully grounded within our own bodies, anchored into reality. It helps us create a positive state of being because it clears the mind and helps us become energized and balanced.
So some additional grounding techniques that you can do, you can carry a stone or a crystal in your pocket when you're feeling over energized. Just let that stone absorb your energy, or the opposite, carry one that has the energy that you're wanting to carry with yourself throughout the day. And if you're feeling a little low, absorb some of the energy from the stone. You could make a pot of what's called angry dirt, which I loved this when I came across it. So you just keep a pot of soil right outside of your front door or your back door. And when you need to shed that excess energy, just go out there, plunge your hands into the dirt and feel the energy transfer into the soil and get rid of all of that negative or anxious energy. I thought that was really cool.
I love that.
Well, and you can also do that like gardening, like I'm out in the garden at least once a day. So just transfer that right back out. And then you can create a catchphrase to trigger your grounding. It can be something as simple as, and it's gone. So this phrase can be used as an energy release when you need it. So if you start to feel overwhelmed, just stop for a second, say your catchphrase, and push that energy back out.
And you can also use some of these techniques if you're in public and say you need to ground yourself because you're feeling panicked or anxious, but you don't want to take your shoes off or do any sort of grounding exercise in public with people around. Carry something grounding with you that you can touch. This could be anything from like salt jewelry, herbs like garden sage, damiana, holy basil, lavender, parsley, and cypress. You can put these in like a necklace or a bundle to keep in your pocket if you need to ground yourself in public.
I'm terrible because I cannot think of the name of this grounding therapy that we used to use. But when I was in the military and I was a ADAPT counselor, I also did post-deployment. So it was basically a special unit. Everyone that deployed, when they came back, they had to stop in Germany for 2 weeks. And we did a bunch of briefings and trainings and classes with them. And then we would take them out in public on a field trip, essentially. So they got to go on a field trip and realize that they're not in that deployed setting anymore. They don't have to be on their guard. And we would teach them to, if they started to feel anxious because there were too many people around and they were trying to where's my exits kind of thing, we would teach them to ground themselves by finding 5 things that brought them back into today's reality. So, if they're out and they see a billboard, you don't see billboards when you're deployed. If you see just like a regular car driving by, not a Humvee or, that's number 2. And then you look around and there's like an ice cream shop, that's number 3, like things that you wouldn't see in a deployed setting that would ground them back into the reality of where they were right then and help calm some of that PTSD anxiety.
Oh, I love that.
I can't remember what it's called for the life of me right now. I know this is going to be one of those I'm going to wake up at 2 a.m. and be like, duh. But yeah, that was a therapy that we used to use.
Yeah. But also too, that's something that our listeners can use if they're feeling anxious in a place, look for 5 things that will bring you back to reality.
So when do you use grounding? Grounding is not always necessary since there's certain types of magic that can be hindered by grounding, while other types simply don't require grounding to be effective. Being too grounded when working with spirits can make it more difficult to connect to the entity, so you wouldn't want to ground before working with a spirit. Grounding prior to working magic fueled by emotions or by excitement will not be effective because it can neutralize the energy in the emotions that you need. Sigils generally do not require grounding. Any astral or out of body practice will be difficult if you ground beforehand, but you should definitely ground afterwards. Dream work could be hindered by grounding. And then grounding is just most often used for post-spell backlash, but it can be used in your everyday life to help enhance your focus and your happiness, lessen your anxiety, protect you from any emotional runoff, or like we were talking about earlier with the research studies, like preventing muscle soreness or helping cure wounds if you cut yourself or something, you could use it for a lot of other stuff too. And then other ways to ground would be to garden, which will help you connect to the earth. You could lean against a solid tree to connect to the earth's solidity. And then just the physical act of eating is also considered grounding, which I found interesting. I didn't even think about that, when you're eating fruits and vegetables that come from the earth, or they even said for eating meat, if you're eating cows that feed from the earth, you're essentially grounding yourself still. I mean, I don't know exactly how it worked, but that's what
maybe
they said.
If you're really conscious about it,
yeah,
and you're thinking about it.
I would think you would have to be, because we all eat every day, right? But I don't think I've ever thought about it while eating. And then for the portion of like the physical act of eating for grounding, you would consider foods mostly that are heavy in carbohydrates like bread, rice, and pasta, which I found interesting. But again, the article did say, like, eating your fruits and vegetables, those come from the ground. Or if you are someone who eats meat, then the animals that you eat often feed from things that come from the ground. So
I found the same thing as well. And then also it talked about homemade bread, root vegetables, carrots, apples, dark chocolate. All of these things are great to help you if you are wanting to ground through food. The focus here is on the taste and the texture and the energy that you will receive from eating it, and knowing that it comes from the ground and that you're eating it as a way to ground yourself. And then if you're out in nature, you can just find a quiet spot, lay down, and allow your hands and feet to touch the ground, as Tiffany's already mentioned. And then also gardening without gloves. And you can even use meditations while you're doing this to help ground you. And then I saw this and I did not know that this was a thing, but I thought it was super interesting. Gardening soil actually helps make people happy because there's like a chemical, I guess, that they put in the garden soil that is linked to serotonin production. And it makes people feel happy when they're gardening, which is really cute.
So it's a chemical that's used, I forget what it's called, but essentially this chemical also makes plants happy. So yeah, it makes you have happy, healthy plants. So, but
really cute.
Using it also like produces serotonin in you and makes you happy.
That's really cute.
Right.
Also, just some types of grounding exercises. There's one where you're outside, you can put your back to a tree or put your back against like your garden or a forest. And essentially, like what you would do if you were in this situation, you wanted to ground out in nature, is you would go up to a tree or a plant, and in your mind's eye, you kind of visualize which tree would like to help me. Go up to the tree or the plant and ask for it to help you feel what it's like to be that tree or that plant. This can be increasingly powerful just every time that you perform this sort of grounding exercise, getting out of nature and just giving nature the respect that it deserves. And once you have found your connection with a specific tree or a plant or whatever you're using, use breath to calm yourself. Inhale, bring the gift of life from the plants and trees into your body. Exhale, giving them the gift of life. And this just goes back to that balance with the sacred and other living things that we share the earth with, like you're taking from them and you're also giving back. And then as you're meditating and you're trying to ground yourself, think of the sensation of roots descending from your spine down below you and expanding further out into the earth from your feet. You're absorbing minerals, water, and energy of the earth up through your spine and into your heart. Direct the energy to a particular area that needs healing. So if you are experiencing anxiety, if you're feeling pain in any part of your body, direct that energy to that particular area of your body that you feel like needs healing and needs the benefits from the grounding exercise. And if you're inside, you can totally do this. But I mean, obviously, you might not have access to a tree inside your house, which I mean, who does? But if you're inside, just make sure that you're turning off your phones or your computer, locking your door, sitting in quietness. And, you could do this inside of a cast circle, which is something that we've discussed on the podcast before, but we haven't actually talked about how to cast a circle, which we will in the future. But you can cast a circle. You can do this before or after casting a spell if you're needing energy or you're needing healing. But just know that if you are refined to an apartment building or a home and you don't have access to any sort of green space, you can do grounding anywhere. Just having that visualization and working on the visualization will help you to ground in whatever setting you're in.
I would assume you could use like a house plant too.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
I mean, most witchy people have at least one plant.
Exactly. Yeah. So you could definitely use a house plant if you had one. But, the focus is obviously just bringing the energy up from the earth into our bodies and then grounding the energy back down into the earth when we're done. So this can be done anywhere. Another grounding exercise that you can do, and something that's really easy, is something called tree visualization. And basically, this is drawing from or grounding energy into the earth. It can be used both ways. And it's a lot like the visualization that I talked about before, but instead of like you going up to a tree and asking for permission and experiencing what it's like to be that tree or that plant, you're basically being a tree or a plant, essentially. Like you're visualizing yourself as that. So basically what you would do in this type of grounding exercise is you would stand on the ground barefoot, or in your home barefoot on the ground, and stand up with your hands spread above your head like tree limbs. And what you would do is visualize your feet anchoring into the earth like the roots of the tree, and visualize that the roots can find their way into the earth through your shoes and through the concrete, whatever is blocking your bare feet with the soil of the earth. Visualize no barriers, and you're actually in contact with the earth. Essentially, you connect with the earth through the roots of your feet. Imagine them as roots and visualize the energy flowing into your body, filling yourself with the power of the earth. And to neutralize energy, if you're wanting to use grounding to neutralize energy instead of bringing energy into your body, what you would do is you would imagine that the energy that you need to neutralize, whether that be stress, anxiety, pain, anything that you're wanting to neutralize, it's flowing from you through your feet and down into the earth.
So another way that I found you can do grounding, which I kind of mentioned using crystals before, is through crystals. So hematite is an all-purpose grounding and balancing stone. So just carrying hematite, wearing it in jewelry, just like having one near you can help with grounding. Or you can use specific crystal layouts that have the effect of grounding and healing. So I have 2 examples that I'll give, but I'm sure there are like a ton of different ones out there. But the first one is called hexagram layout. So this uses 6 crystals. It says it can be any kind of crystal, but if you're using different ones, you want to have equal amounts of the differing. So like you could have like 2 rose quartz, 2 citrine, or 2 hematite. You just don't want to have one of 6 different stones, or you can use all the same. Lay the crystals out in the shape of a hexagram around you, sitting cross-legged at the center. So one stone is going to be in front of you, one stone will be behind you, and then you'll have 2 stones to each side of you. And then you visualize a golden hexagram form between you and the crystals, and then feel your energy as being anchored as you do that. The other one is called a 9 crystal layout. So this one is more like you have to have 2 people to do this one. So either someone you trust to do it to you, or if somebody has come to you needing help with like energy balancing, this is something you can do for someone else. So it uses 9 grounding crystals. So while laying on your back, one crystal is placed 5 centimeters above your head. The next 2 are going to be placed 5 centimeters out from the shoulders. The next 2 will be placed 5 centimeters from the hands. The next 2 are 5 centimeters from the outside of the knees. And then the last 2 are placed about 5 centimeters down from each of your feet. And then as you're laying there and trying to ground yourself, you're going to visualize a golden egg shape around you for about 5 minutes, filling your energy's anchor.
Another crystal that I saw that I think would work great for grounding is a black tourmaline.
Mm-hmm.
And we've discussed black tourmaline already on this podcast for its protective qualities, but is also a great crystal to use in grounding work because it helps to offset other crystals that aren't so grounding, and it works to keep you present and centered. It's also great to keep on you when you're out, especially if you're feeling overwhelmed or anxious and you want to do a quick grounding exercise in public. This would be a great stone to use.
So get outside and ground yourself today.
Yes. Yeah. Get outside, ground yourself, and let us know how you ground yourself. Are we missing anything? Like, did we not talk about something that you've used in your grounding exercises, or let us know?
Also, I was going to say this earlier and I completely forgot, but a quick note. This is another one of those things that when I was a kid, I used to do this with my grandparents, not realizing it. My grandmother had these beautiful rose bushes out front, and they had a like little patch of strawberries and ice plant. And we would go out front and leave your shoes on the sidewalk and walk out into the grass. And we would do all of the yard work that we were doing, like trimming the roses and picking the strawberries and cutting back the ice plant. We would do that all like barefoot in the grass. So again, one of those other things that I just didn't realize what we were doing, but we were doing it.
Mm-hmm. And there's so many people that I know that, they're like, oh, I'm not witchy, I'm not pagan or whatever, but they use grounding in their everyday exercises. And there's nothing inherently witchy about it because there's so much scientific backed evidence for grounding. but it's so interesting to see how it's being used in everybody else's life.
I love topics like this that are witchy with scientific background, because like we were talking about earlier, you know, you have so many people that just kind of like frown down on pagan or witchy practices, but there's so much in these practices that are scientifically backed, that there's actual research out there for them showing that these practices actually work and they have positive outcomes. So it's always fun when we get to cover a topic like this that you could be like, so anyways, according to this scientific research study.
Exactly. Yeah.
I love it.
Because nobody can come back and be like, actually, that's just all in your head.
Yeah.
No,
dummy.
No, Kyle, it's not. No,
Chad. Brad.
Sorry if there's anybody listening to this named Chad, Brad, or
Kyle.
We love you. We're just being funny. That's it for this episode of Get In Loser, We're Doing Witchcraft. You can find our source material for this episode linked in the show notes. If you love this episode, we would be forever thankful if you leave us a 5-star review on wherever you listen to your podcasts. If you really love the show and want more Get In Loser content, check out our Supercast link provided in the show notes, or search the Supercast website for Get In Loser, We're Doing Witchcraft. There you can purchase a membership to our podcast and obtain exclusives like getting episodes early, shoutouts on the show, access to our Ask Me Anything forum, our monthly newsletter, a promo code for merchandise, and more.
You can also find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Get In Witches, or email us at we'redoingwitchcraft@gmail.com. Check us out next week, where we will talk about manifesting prosperity. Until then, blessed be witches.